I'm Major General Marlena Halloran, 48 years old, and I have spent 26 years in the United States Marine Corps, becoming the woman my father said girls could not become. For most of that career, I let him be wrong about my job, because the alternative was watching him try to be right about it. But the morning I reported in as the new Director of Marine Corps Intelligence at Quantico, a 20-year-old Lance Corporal at the visitor gate tore up my pass before I had finished a sentence, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps walked in behind him, and I made a choice that changed everything that came next. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who decided who you were before you opened your mouth? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe. The first ribbon I ever won, my father moved into a drawer. I was 8 years old. It was a second-place science fair ribbon from my elementary school in Wilmington, North Carolina. The project was a poster about how barrier islands move during hurricanes. My mother had helped me cut out the construction paper waves. The ribbon was blue and white, with a gold seal in the middle that said, Wilmington Elementary, second place, grade 3. I came home with it pinned to the front of my dress. My father was at the kitchen table reading the Wilmington Star News. My brother Knox, 11, was at the counter eating cereal in a youth football jersey. My mother was at the sink with her back to us. I stood next to my father's elbow and waited. He turned the page. He folded the paper into thirds. He looked at the ribbon. He said, "Good," and put his hand back on the paper. My brother showed him his 5th grade football trophy from the same week. My father stood up, put on his work boots, and took my brother out into the front yard to throw a football. The screen door slammed. My mother turned around and dried her hands. She looked at the ribbon. She looked at me. She picked the ribbon off my dress, and she walked it down the hallway to the bookshelf in the den, and she put it on the second shelf where my father kept his Marine Corps cruise books. That night, the ribbon was on the 3rd shelf. The next morning, it was on the 4th shelf. By the end of the week, it was in the drawer of the desk where my father did his taxes once a year and otherwise did nothing at all. My mother bought a small frame for it 3 months later when she found it crumpled at the back of the drawer, and she put the frame on the mantel in the living room between a picture of my brother in a youth football helmet and a picture of my father in his commissioning portrait from 1967. The frame stayed on the mantel for 2 days. Then my father moved it onto the bookshelf. Then he moved it onto the desk. Then it was back in the drawer. This continued for 10 years. My mother put things up. My father moved them. He did not throw them away. He did not say a word about it. He just kept moving them by inches, away from the parts of the house where guests would walk, until they ended up in drawers and on shelves no one looked at. By the time I was a teenager, I understood the pattern as a kind of weather. It was not personal. It was simply what happened in the house. The Hallorans had 2 children. One of them wore a football jersey, and the other one did not. One of them was going to be a Marine, and the other one was a girl. The mantel was reserved for the photographs of the right child. My father was Sergeant Major Dwight Halloran, United States Marine Corps, retired. He had enlisted in 1967 at the age of 19, served 2 tours in Vietnam, made Sergeant Major before he was 45, retired in 1996 after 28 years and 3 days. He measured the world in carbine drills and forced ruck marches and the kinds of mistakes that get men killed. He did not measure science fairs. He did not measure grade school spelling bees. He measured running speed and how a person held a rifle. And his daughter did neither of those things, so his daughter was not measured. My mother was Sylvie Halloran, born Beaumont, retired elementary school librarian from Wilmington. She had attended every science fair I entered, every band concert I sat through, every parent-teacher conference my father skipped. She had paid the registration fees for the regional science competitions out of her library paycheck, separately in cash, so my father would not see the line on the bank statement. She had taught me, by example, how to keep a small interior life intact in a house that did not officially acknowledge it. She had also taught me, less intentionally, how to lie by omission. I would use that skill for the next 40 years. My brother Knox was 3 years older than me. He was Dwight Halloran's son in every way the word had ever meant. He played football, ran track, hated reading, idolized our father, enlisted in the Marine Corps the day after his 18th birthday. served one tour as a Lance Corporal infantryman in Iraq in 2004 and 2005, came home, married a girl from Wilmington, opened an auto body shop on Market Street, and never wore his uniform again. He was the right child. He was the photograph on the mantle. He knew it. He carried it well. He did not weaponize it against me, which is a generosity I did not appreciate until I was 30 years old and met other women whose brothers had not been so kind. When I was 14 years old, in May of 1992, I won the Regional Grand Prize at the Wilmington Civic Center Science Fair. The project was about using satellite imagery to predict hurricane paths along the Outer Banks. The judges were two professors from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and a retired Air Force colonel. The retired colonel asked me 3 questions, all of them sharp, and after the third one, he handed me the grand prize trophy himself and told me I should think about the Naval Academy or NROTC when the time came. He pressed a folded business card into my hand and told me to keep it somewhere safe. My mother took a photograph with the disposable camera. My father was at a Marine Corps League dinner that night across town. He came home at 10 p.m., saw the trophy on the kitchen counter, said, "Nice," and went to bed. I kept the colonel's business card in the front of my school binder for 4 years. I did not tell my father about it. I did not tell my mother for 2 years either. I knew sitting in the Civic Center auditorium at 14 years old with a trophy in my lap and a business card in my hand that I was going to find a way to put on a uniform without telling my father until it was finished. That was the night I started the long, slow work of becoming a Marine inside a house that would not have allowed it if it had known. My mother figured it out. She did not stop me. She did not help me exactly. She did, 2 years later, sit me down at the kitchen table when my father was at the Marine Corps League and ask me, "Marley, are you going to do what I think you're going to do?" I said yes. She said, "Don't tell him until it's signed. Don't tell him until they cannot take it back." I followed her advice for the next 26 years. I went to UNC Chapel Hill in the fall of 1996 on what I told my parents was a partial academic scholarship. It was, in fact, a full NROTC Marine Option Scholarship. The retired colonel's business card had been to a Marine NROTC recruiter at UNC. I had written to the recruiter at 17, applied without my parents' knowledge, interviewed in Raleigh on a school field trip. Saturday, I had told my mother was a museum visit and signed the contract 2 weeks before I graduated high school. My mother knew, my father did not. I told my father the night before I commissioned on a long-distance call from a payphone outside the UNC drill deck because I did not want to see his face. It was May of 1999. I was 21 years old. I had finished 4 years of NROTC, 4 years of Marine officer candidate work in the summers at Quantico, and I was going to be sworn in the next morning as a second lieutenant. My mother had sent me a card with $20 in it. My brother was on deployment to Okinawa and could not come. My father was a 6-hour drive away and could. The payphone was outside the field house. I stood under a security light in a thunderstorm in a cheap rain shell with my finger in one ear so I could hear over the rain. I dialed home. My mother answered. I said, "Mom, put Dad on." She said, "He's at the League." I said, "Mom, call him at the League. I need to tell him something tonight." She was quiet for 2 seconds. Then she said, "All right." She hung up. 20 minutes later, the payphone rang. I answered it. My father said, "Marlena, your mother said this is important." I said, "Dad, I am commissioning second lieutenant in the Marine Corps tomorrow morning at the UNC drill deck. The ceremony is at 0900. I have been in NROTC for 4 years. I have been to OCS 3 summers. I have a Marine option contract. I am going to be a Marine officer. I am calling you because my mother told me to." The line was quiet for a long time. Then my father laughed. It was a short, dry laugh, the laugh of a man who has just been told a joke and is trying to figure out who the joke is on. He said, "Marine Corps." Then he said, "Marine Corps." My mother, audible in the background, said, "Dwight." He stopped laughing. He said, "Marlena, girls don't make Marines. You're going to wash out at the basic school in the rain, drive home, and we will not talk about it again. That's all right. That's all right." I said, I am not going to wash out, Dad. I will see you when I see you. I hung up the payphone. I stood in the rain for another minute. I walked back to my barracks room. The next morning at 0900, I raised my right hand on the UNC drill deck with 12 other midshipmen, swore the oath, accepted my bars from my NROTC commanding officer, and ate lunch with my mother and my faculty advisor in a Chapel Hill diner. My father was not there. He had not driven up. He had not called. My mother sat across from me at the diner with her hands folded in her lap and said, "I am proud of you, Marley. He is going to be proud of you too. He just does not know how to start." I told her she was wrong. I was right. I reported to the basic school at Marine Corps Base Quantico in August of 1999. I was 21. The basic school is a 6-month course. Every Marine officer goes through after commissioning before learning their specific job. You are in the Virginia woods. You are wet most of the time. You are running, rucking, navigating, shooting, leading, eating MREs, sleeping 4 hours, getting up to do it again. The Marine Corps does not believe in the basic school being a job interview. The Marine Corps believes in the basic school being a filter. The filter caught roughly a third of my company. It did not catch me. In January of 2000, in Sleet, my company ran a 6-mile combat ruck. I finished in the lead pack of female lieutenants and in the middle of the overall company. My squad leader, Captain Jonas Mears, an infantry officer who would be killed 3 years later in Helmand by a roadside bomb, clapped me on the shoulder at the finish line and said, "Halloran, that's a Marine ruck." I called my father that night from a payphone outside the squad bay. I told him I had finished in the middle of the company and that my squad leader had said it was a Marine ruck. My father said, "Halfway. Did you walk?" I said, "No." He said, "Half the Corps walks. Doesn't matter." We argued about that sentence for the next 26 years. In April of 2000, I selected my military occupational specialty. The basic school graduates rank order the available jobs, and the Marine Corps assigns based on a combination of preference and class standing. The popular jobs were infantry, armor, and aviation. Intelligence was not popular. Intelligence was viewed by the company of newly minted Marine lieutenants around me as a desk specialty. Intelligence was viewed by Captain Mears as the work the Corps did when it was not getting Marines killed. I picked intelligence first on my list, against the advice of 2/3 of my classmates and almost all of the running buddies I had made over the previous 6 months. I was assigned MOS 0202 Intelligence Officer. I reported to Dam Neck, Virginia in May of 2000 for the Intelligence Officer course. I told my father on another payphone call that I had picked intelligence. He was quiet for almost a minute. Then he said, "So what is it, Marlena? You sit at a computer, you read reports, you tell some captain what some other captain already knew. That's intelligence?" I said, "That's not what it is, Dad." He said, "Sounds like a typist." I said, "It is not a typist." He said, "Marlena, sounds like a typist." That was the last time I tried to explain to my father what I did for a living. For the next 25 years, whenever he asked me on a phone call what I was working on, I said, "Staff work, Dad." He heard exactly what he wanted to hear. He told his Marine Corps League friends when they asked that his daughter was doing some staff thing for the Corps. He did not lie. He did not embellish. He passed along the only sentence I had ever given him. That sentence held for 25 years because I let it hold. I let him be wrong about my career because the alternative was watching him try to be right about it. I met Imogen Trask at Dam Neck in the summer of 2000. She was a second lieutenant in my intelligence officer class, the daughter of an Army colonel from Atlanta, smart-mouthed, sharp, and immediately my friend. We sat next to each other in classified systems training. We ran together on the perimeter road in the evenings. We complained about the Navy chow hall together. She had grown up in a house where her father had measured her career from the day she was born, and she had spent her entire life being the inverse of what I had been. Visible, supported, expected. We balanced each other. One evening in August of 2000, sitting on the seawall at Dam Neck, watching the Atlantic come in, Imogen turned to me and said, "Marlena, listen to me. You're going to make general before your father is dead. He's going to have to see it. You ready for that?" I said, "He's not going to see it. He's going to refuse to see it." She shook her head and said, "He will see it. He is going to have to." The Marine Corps is small, and your father drinks coffee with other Marines. She was right about the first part. She was wrong about the timing. I made first lieutenant in March of 2001 at Camp Lejeune. I made captain in March of 2003 at Camp Lejeune. I deployed to Iraq with the 1st Marine Division in November of 2004. I came home in March of 2006 wearing a Bronze Star with V device for an action in February of 2005 that involved 7 hours of close work I have never described in detail to anyone outside the official report, including to my father, including in this story. I made major in August of 2009 at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. I made lieutenant colonel in September of 2014 and took command of 1st Intelligence Battalion at Camp Pendleton. I made colonel in September of 2019 on the Joint Staff at the Pentagon. I made brigadier general in August of 2023 and was assigned as the deputy director of the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity at Marine Corps Base Quantico, the same base I had reported to as a butter bar lieutenant 23 years earlier. I did not tell my father about any of those promotions. My mother knew about all of them. She did not tell him either. That was our private agreement struck at her kitchen table in 2003 on a porch in dim summer light that I would tell her and she would not tell him, and that he could find out from other Marines or not at all. He found out from other Marines, sometimes years late. He never called me about any of them. My mother told me, twice that I can confirm, that he bragged at the League Hall about his daughter being a Marine. He did not ever brag about her being a captain, or a colonel, or a general. He bragged about her being a Marine. The word daughter never made it into either bragged about sentence. In May of 2026, in a private ceremony in a wood-paneled office at the Pentagon, with my mother on the speakerphone of my chief of staff's cell phone propped up on a window ledge, and my brother Knox on the line beside her, the Commandant of the Marine Corps administered the oath of office for Major General. General Roland Forsyth was 60 years old, tall, white-haired, 4 stars on each shoulder, and the second most senior officer in the United States Marine Corps. He had been my battalion commander at Camp Lejeune in 2004. He had written my fitness report from Iraq in 2006. He had pinned my Brigadier General Star in August of 2023. He was the man who had been quietly tracking my career for 22 years. He swore me in. He pinned the 2nd star. He shook my hand. He said in his Tennessee voice, "Marlena, I want you back at Quantico in 9 days. You are the new director of the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity. The change of command is on the morning of May 22nd at 0900. I will be there. Do not wear your jeans." He smiled when he said it because he knew me. I had worn jeans to a pre-brief at his Pentagon office once, in 2017, after flying in from a Pacific exercise overnight, and he had teased me about it for 9 years. I flew to San Diego on the 18th of May to close out a liaison detachment, ran a change of command for a small MCIA element at Coronado on the 19th. Red-eyed back to Reagan National on the 21st and arrived in Northern Virginia at 0545 on the morning of May 22nd, 2026. I had not slept. I had not eaten. I picked up a rental sedan at the airport, hung my dress blues Garmin bag across the back seat, and drove south on Interstate 95 in jeans and a Marine Corps marathon windbreaker and a pair of running shoes, because the change of command was at 0900 and the BOQ was inside the gate, and I was going to shower and change once I was on the base. I rolled into the visitor center parking lot at Marine Corps Base Quantico at 0730 hours. It was raining, the first true rain of late spring. The visitor center is a low brick building just outside the main perimeter, with 2 glass doors and a counter where Marines on watch process new arrivals. I parked the rental. I took my wallet and my common access card and my orders out of my carry-on. I walked through the rain in the windbreaker, hair in a wet ponytail, no makeup, eyes tired from a red-eye, jeans damp at the cuffs. I pulled open the door and walked to the counter. There were 2 Marines behind it. One was Lance Corporal Jackson Doolin. He was 20 years old. He had been in the Marine Corps for 3 years. He had been on the visitor center gate for 2 months. He had short brown hair, broad shoulders, fresh service Charlies, and the careful posture of a young Marine who had recently been chewed out for slouching. He was the Marine at the counter. The other Marine was Gunnery Sergeant Eamon Voss, 41 years old, 18 years in, the watch chief sitting at a desk 20 feet behind the counter with a coffee in his hand and a clipboard in front of him. Boss looked up when I walked in. He saw a tired blonde woman in jeans. He went back to his coffee. Lance Corporal Doolin stepped to the counter. He said, "Help you, ma'am?" I said, "Reporting in. Director, MCIA. I need the visitor pass to get to headquarters until my new permanent CAC reads here." He looked at me for a long beat. He said, "Director of what?" I said, "Marine Corps, Intelligence Activity. Headquartered on this base. I have orders." I slid the orders, my common access card, and my retired Marine identification across the counter. He picked up the common access card. He did not scan it. He looked at the picture, looked at me, did not recognize the rank stripe on the back of the card because he was a Lance Corporal at a gate and not a personnel clerk, and put the card down. He started to fill out a visitor pass. He wrote CIV in the visitor category box. He said, "Ma'am, civilian visitor passes are issued at the main gate, 2 miles south. This counter is for active duty inbound personnel only." I said calmly, "Lance Corporal, I am active duty inbound. My CAC is in your hand." He glanced down at the card, did not pick it up, did not scan it. He said, "Ma'am, your CAC reads expired or unrecognized. Look, please step back and let me help the person behind you." There was no person behind me. The visitor center was empty. I said, "Please scan the card." He said, "I don't need to scan the card, ma'am." I said, "Please ask the gunnery sergeant to come over here." Voss from the back desk said, without looking up, "Doolin, handle it." Doolin picked up the visitor pass he had been filling out. He looked at me. He tore it cleanly in half, across the laminated middle of the pass with both hands, in front of me. He pushed the 2 halves across the counter and said, "Ma'am, visitor passes are for civilians. Get back in your car and try the other gate. Lady, I will tell you what I felt, and you will not believe me." I did not feel angry. I felt 48 years old. I felt the entire weight of every kitchen table I had sat at, in Wilmington and in Chapel Hill and in Camp Lejeune and at the Pentagon, where someone had decided who I was before I had opened my mouth. I felt my father moving a science fair ribbon out of a frame and into a drawer when I was 9 years old. I felt a payphone receiver in my hand outside a UNC drill deck in 1999. I felt a 6-mile ruck in sleet at Quantico in 2000. I felt a Bronze Star ceremony in 2005 that my father had not attended. I felt the entire weight of it land on my shoulders in a brick building outside the main gate at 07:33 in the morning. And I did not raise my voice, and I did not pick up the pieces of the pass, and I just looked at the Lance Corporal and the door opened behind him. General Roland Forsyth walked in, 4 stars on each shoulder board of his service alpha green coat, the eagle, globe, and anchor centered on the front of his white cover. His Marine Corps aide 1 step behind him. He was scheduled at the MCIA building at 08:30 for a brief, and he had stopped at the visitor center on the way in for reasons he did not explain to me until later that afternoon and that I will not explain here. He took 2 steps inside the front door and saw the torn visitor pass on the counter, and he saw me, and he stopped walking. He had pinned my 2nd star in his office at the Pentagon 9 days earlier. He recognized my face. He recognized whose orders had just been slid across that counter. He crossed the room in 5 steps. He did not say a word until he got to the counter. He reached across the counter with his left hand and took the 2 torn halves of the visitor pass out from under Lance Corporal Doolin's hand, pulled them aggressively across the counter to himself, in one motion. His right arm came up in salute and he held it. He said, in the low, flat voice he used when he was the angriest he was going to allow himself to get, "Lance Corporal, stand at attention." Doolin went white. He snapped to attention. Gunnery Sergeant Voss put down his coffee. He stood up. He started to come forward and then stopped because the Commandant of the Marine Corps was holding a salute, and there was nothing Gunnery Sergeant Voss could do that was going to improve the next 60 seconds. The Commandant held the salute. He looked past Doolin at me. He said, "General Halloran, sir, my apologies. Welcome to Quantico." I returned the salute. Slowly, I said, "Commandant?" He dropped his hand. He pulled a roll of dispatcher's tape from the cup on the counter, tore off a strip with his teeth, taped the two halves of the visitor pass together along the laminated tear, and pressed it flat between his palms. He handed it to me across the counter. He turned to Doolin. He said, "Lance Corporal, you will report to the Provost Marshal at 1300 hours. You will explain to her, in your own words, what just happened. You will not be defensive. You will not blame anyone else. You will tell her exactly what you did." "Do you understand?" Doolin said. "Aye, sir." His voice cracked. The Commandant turned to Voss. He said, "Gunnery Sergeant, the Provost Marshal, 1300, with your Lance Corporal." Voss said, "Aye, sir," in the voice of a man who had aged 5 years and 15 seconds. The Commandant turned back to me. He said, "General, may I escort you to your change of command?" I said, "Sir, with respect, I'd like to shower first." He nodded. He said, "Of course, 0900, MCIA headquarters. I will see you there." He turned and walked out. His aide followed. The door closed. I stood at the counter holding a taped-together visitor pass. Lance Corporal Doolin was still at attention. Gunnery Sergeant Voss was standing 2 feet behind him with both hands at his sides. Not at attention, but not at anything else either. The visitor center was very quiet. The rain on the roof was very loud. I picked up my orders and my common access card. I put them back into my carry-on. I looked at Lance Corporal Doolin, who could not look at me, and I said, "Lance Corporal, at ease." He did not move. He could not. I said, "Lance Corporal, you may stand at ease." He went to parade rest. I said, "Carry on." I turned and walked out into the rain. I sat in the rental car for 2 minutes before I started the engine. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I put both hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position, and I held them there, and I felt, for the first time in my career, that I had just been seen by the United States Marine Corps in the body of one Lance Corporal and in the body of one Commandant in the same 6 minutes. And the difference between the two had not been my uniform. It had been theirs. I drove the half-mile through the rain to the bachelor officer quarters. I checked into the room my aide had reserved. I showered. I put on the dress blue Alpha uniform I had been wearing as a private credential for 9 days. Coat, dark midnight blue, 2 silver stars on each shoulder board, the eagle, globe, and anchor on each collar. Trousers, sky blue with the red officer's blood stripe down the outer seam. Shirt, white. Tie, midnight blue. Cover, white, the eagle, globe, and anchor centered. On the left breast, the ribbon rack. Combat Action Ribbon, Bronze Star with V device, 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals, the Joint Service Commendation, the Marine Corps Commendation Medal with 3 stars, the Iraq Campaign Medal, the Global War on Terror Service and Expeditionary Medals, the Sea Service Deployment Ribbon, the Distinguished Service Medal, pinned in August of 2023. I adjusted the cover. I looked in the closet mirror. My face was calm. My hands were not. At 0900, in the MCIA headquarters auditorium, with 800 Marines and civilians of the Directorate seated in folding chairs, in dress blues and service alphas, with General Forsyth at the podium and the outgoing director, Major General Eli Brisbane, beside him, the colors of the Marine Corps intelligence activity were transferred from Brisbane's hands to mine. I held the colors. I gave a 4-minute speech. I thanked General Brisbane for his 16 months of service in the chair. I thanked General Forsyth for his confidence. I thanked in absentia my mother, who had taught 100 elementary school children to read while raising me. I deliberately did not name my father. I deliberately did not name Imogen Trask, who was in the front row in dress blues. I said, "I am the daughter of a Marine. I grew up in a Marine house. Everything I know about service I learned from people who do not look like me, who would not have predicted me, and who taught me anyway. I will not waste their time." I shook General Forsyth's hand. The room rose. The Marine Corps band played the Marines' hymn. I walked off the stage as the director, Marine Corps Intelligence Activity, and went to the parking lot of the building and called Imogen Trask, who had ducked out of the reception to find a quiet corner, and I told her about the visitor center. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was the first time in 26 years she had not interrupted me. When I finished, she said, "Marlena, I love you. But you went to your first day in jeans because some piece of you still wanted to be the kid he didn't notice. Stop. You're a general. Wear the uniform on arrival from now on. I said. I had been flying since midnight. She said. I don't care if you had been swimming since midnight. Wear the uniform. She hung up. I sat in the rental car in the BOQ parking lot in dress blues and stared at the steering wheel for 10 minutes. She was right. I had not been performing dishevelment for the Gate Marine. I had been performing dishevelment for my father, who was 420 miles south of me, who did not know I had been confirmed and who would not have cared if he did. Imogen had named it in 10 seconds. I had been running from a kitchen table since I was 8 years old. I went back into MCIA headquarters. I walked into the director's office for the first time. The 2-star flag stood behind the desk. The window faced south. Over the parade deck I had run a 6-mile ruck on in February of 2000. The bookshelf was mostly empty. The previous director had left me 3 books and a brass paperweight in the shape of the eagle, globe, and anchor. I took a framed photograph out of my carry-on. It was a copy I had asked my mother to make for me of the 1992 photograph of me at 14 at the Wilmington Civic Center, holding the Regional Grand Prize Science Fair trophy. I put the framed photograph on the corner of the desk. I turned it to face the chair where a visitor would sit. I sat down in the chair behind the desk for the first time. I looked at the photograph. I sat there for a long time. On Monday morning, 4 days after the change of command, Lieutenant Colonel Beatrix Carmody, the Provost Marshal of Marine Corps Base Quantico, came into my office at 0800 with a manila folder containing the disciplinary package against Lance Corporal Doolin and the non-punitive letter of caution against Gunnery Sergeant Voss. She was 44 years old, a Marine MP officer with 14 years of service, the daughter of a New Hampshire police chief, and exactly the kind of officer the Marine Corps had built her job description around. She handed me the folder. She stood at parade rest in front of my desk. She said, "General, you can mark this NJP and the kid is out by August. Your call." I opened the folder. I read Lance Corporal Doolin's record of service. 3 years in, clean. A letter of appreciation from his platoon sergeant at the School of Infantry for academic performance. 2 letters of appreciation from his recruit depot drill instructor, also for academic performance. A perfect physical fitness test score in 2025. Nothing in the jacket. I read it 3 times. I closed the folder. I said, "Lieutenant Colonel, have the Lance Corporal brought to my office at 1000 tomorrow. Have the Gunnery Sergeant brought at 1400. Hold the paperwork." She said, "Aye, ma'am." She did not press. She left. At 1000 on Tuesday, Lance Corporal Doolin was marched into my office by his platoon sergeant. He was in fresh service Charlies. He had a haircut that had been done at 0600 that morning. He had not slept. He was 20 years old and visibly braced for the end of his Marine Corps career. The platoon sergeant introduced him and stood at parade rest by the wall. I said, "Platoon sergeant, dismissed. Wait in the outer office." He left. Doolin stood at parade rest in front of my desk. He could not look at me. I said, "Lance Corporal, sit down." He sat, barely, on the front 3 inches of the chair. He said, "Ma'am, I want to apologize for what I said, "Lance Corporal, listen to me." He stopped. I said, "I am not going to throw you out of the Marine Corps for one bad morning. I am also not going to forget it. Here is what is going to happen. For the next 90 days, starting today, you are going to ride along with my MCIA junior briefer twice a week. You will report to her office in Marpat at 0800 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You will sit in the back of every intelligence brief she runs. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will take notes. You will learn what this directorate does and what staff work means. At 90 days, you will write me a 1-page memorandum about what you have learned and what kind of Marine you intend to be from here forward. The memorandum will be on my desk by 8 August. Are we clear?" Doolin said, "Aye, ma'am." His voice was barely audible. I said, "Lance Corporal, one more thing. I am the Director of Marine Corps Intelligence. My job is to be right about something before anyone else is willing to be. The Marine Corps does not pay me to make decisions about a person before that person has finished a sentence. You tore up my past before I had finished a sentence. Do not do that again. To anyone. For the rest of your career. Are we clear?" Doolin said, "Aye, ma'am." His eyes were wet. He was holding it together. He was not going to lose it in my office. I said, "Dismissed." He stood up. He saluted. He walked out. At 1400, Gunnery Sergeant Voss came in. He was 41 years old, 18 years in, infantry crossed to security, the senior NCO who had drunk coffee while a 20-year-old tore up a major general's visitor pass. He stood at attention in front of my desk. I did not ask him to sit. I said, "Gunny, you were the senior Marine in that room. The Lance Corporal made the worst decision of his career while you were drinking coffee at a desk 20 feet behind him. I am not going to write you up. I am going to put your name on every visitor center inspection report I sign for the next year. Everyone. You are going to be the standard or you are going to be the file. Choose." Voss said, "Aye, ma'am." He was not a sentimental man. He understood what I had just said to him better than anyone in the building. I said, "Dismissed." He saluted. He walked out. On Friday, I had a coffee with Imogen Trask at the Officers Club bar. She was in dress blues, Colonel boards, HQMC tabs. I was in service bravos. The story had already traveled the small distance the Marine Corps allows for stories like this. Imogen had heard it from 3 different sources in 2 days. Forsyth's aide had told an HQMC colonel that the Commandant had called the visitor center incident the most useful 60 seconds of his year. Forsyth was 60 years old. He had been Commandant for 2 years. That sentence had reached me by Friday morning. Imogen said, "He's going to remember this, the kid, 20 years from now." I said, "I hope so. I don't want him to remember me. I want him to remember that he tore something up before he looked at it." She said, "That's the line you should put in your father's letter when you write it." I said, "I'm not writing him a letter." She said, "Marlena." I said, "I'm not writing him a letter. I'm going to drive down." She held her coffee with both hands. She did not push. She had known me 26 years. She knew I was going to drive down. She was waiting for me to know it. In mid-June, Lance Corporal Doolin started showing up at the visitor center in fresh service Charlies, fresh haircut, fresh posture. He was now the model gate Marine. Gunnery Sergeant Voss was standing behind him at the watch desk, actually standing, not seated, hands behind his back. They were running checked-in visitors through the counter in 75 seconds with full ID scans and the correct courtesy titles. A retired lieutenant general came through the gate for an MCIA brief in mid-June. Doolin called him sir. Voss called him sir. The lieutenant general noted it on the way out and mentioned it to my chief of staff at the brief. Word came back to me by the end of the day. On Tuesday afternoons, in the MCIA junior briefers' bullpen, Doolin and Marpat sat in the back of top-secret intelligence briefings on Indo-Pacific maritime collection and Eastern European cyber activity. He understood maybe 30% of what he was hearing. He took notes. He asked sharp questions at the end. The junior briefer, a Marine major named Reyes, fielded the questions seriously, because he knew whose office Doolin had come from, and because Doolin was asking the right ones. In late June, Doolin asked Major Reyes, after a brief, how a Lance Corporal military policeman went about reclassifying to MOS 0231, the intelligence specialist enlisted track. Major Reyes told him. He told me about the conversation the next day in a hallway. Doolin was working on the package. He had asked his gunnery sergeant to back him. Voss backed him. That was the moment I knew Voss was actually going to change. A 41-year-old infantry crossed to security Marine had decided in his 18th year of service that the right thing to do with the Lance Corporal who had embarrassed him in front of the Commandant of the Marine Corps was sign that Lance Corporal's package out of his own MOS into intelligence. Voss was going to lose him. Voss signed the package anyway. I will remember Voss for that for the rest of my career. In early July, on the first Tuesday of the month, Sergeant Major Carl Bowers, United States Marine Corps, retired, age 81, 2 Vietnam tours, 30 years in, leaned across a coffee table in the Marine Corps League Hall in Wilmington, North Carolina, and said to my father, "Dwight, heard something out of Quantico." My father said, "Oh." Bowers said, "Heard your girl is the new MCIA director." My father said, "She's a staff officer." Bowers said, "Dwight, she's a 2-star. She's the director. You know what that means?" My father was quiet for a long time. He said, "What does it mean?" Bowers said, "It means she runs Marine intelligence. The whole damn thing." from Quantico. She's the third person in the Corps who has had that job in the last decade. The other two were men I would have saluted if I had seen them in a parking lot. My father did not call me that night. He did not call me that week. He did not call me for the rest of the month. What he did was take down a photograph from the den bookshelf. The photograph was from my commissioning at UNC in May of 1999. My mother had taken it. She had put it on the mantel, where my father had moved it onto the bookshelf, where I had thought he had left it. He took it down from the bookshelf. He turned it over. He looked at the date she had written in pencil on the back. He set it on the kitchen table face up. He went out to the garage. He did not come in for 2 hours. My mother told me later that he was sitting on the workbench with the lights off. My mother also told me that the photograph stayed on the kitchen table for 3 weeks. He did not move it. He did not say anything about it. He ate his breakfast next to it. He read his paper next to it. He drank his afternoon coffee next to it. The photograph was a 21-year-old woman in dress blue alphas with new butter bars on the shoulder boards and an expression that was trying to be neutral and was not quite making it. My mother told me over a phone call in the 3rd week of July that he had been quiet for 3 weeks and that he had taken his old laptop down from the closet shelf and had been on it every evening for 2 hours after dinner. She did not know what he was reading. She would not look. She said, "He has not asked me about you in 3 weeks. He has not asked me anything. He is just sitting at the kitchen table next to that picture and reading on the laptop and going to bed at 9. I called my brother Knox at the auto body shop. I said, "Knox, I need to come down." He said, "When?" I said, "August, dress blues, 2 stars. I am going to talk to him." Knox said, "Marley, I have to tell you something." I said, "Tell me." He said, "Dad's been quiet, real quiet. Mom says he's reading. He doesn't read." I said, "What's he reading?" He said, "Something on his laptop. She wouldn't tell me what." I said, "I'll be down on the 17th. He said, "Drive safe." He had not told me to drive safe in 28 years. I drove south on Interstate 95 on Saturday, August 17th, 2026 at 0700. In dress blue alphas, 2 silver stars on each shoulder board. White cover on the passenger seat. The folded letter I had written to myself in the BOQ parking lot in May was in the breast pocket of my coat. The letter said, "You did not need permission to be a Marine. You do not need permission to be a general. Stop reporting in dressed like the daughter who is about to be told no." I had been carrying it for 90 days. I planned to leave it on my father's kitchen table when I left. I pulled into Halloran Auto Body on Market Street in Wilmington just past noon. Knox was in coveralls, oil on one forearm, a wrench in his hand. He saw the rental sedan. He saw the dress blues. He put down the wrench. He walked to the bay door and rendered a salute that was half a joke and half not. He said, "Major General Halloran." I said, "Lance Corporal." He said, "23 years out. Don't push me." We embraced. He smelled like motor oil. I smelled like dress wool. He stepped back and said, "He's at the house. Mom is at the house. He has been sitting at the kitchen table for an hour. He knew you were coming." I said, "How?" He said, "Mom told him." I had asked my mother not to tell him. She had told him anyway. It was the second best favor she had done me in 26 years. The first was raising me. Knox and I sat in his office for 20 minutes. He told me about the photograph on the kitchen table, the laptop, the 3-week silence, the conversation with Mom about whether to call me, the decision not to call me, the decision to wait for me to come. He said, "Marley, he's not going to apologize. You know that." I said, "I know." He said, "He's going to ask you what one of those ribbons is, and you are going to tell him, and he's not going to say what he should say, but he is going to ask. That is the apology." I said, "Knox." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Lenk, thanks for being his son." He said, "Thanks for being mine." We had not said anything that direct to each other since I left for college. Sometimes a uniform pulls things out of a brother that nothing else can. I drove the 8 blocks to the Halloran house. I pulled into the driveway I had pulled out of at 17 with the Marine officer selection package in the glove box. The house had not changed. The yard had not changed. The pecan tree in the front had grown 2 feet in 29 years. My mother was on the porch in a navy blouse. She saw the dress blues. She put both hands over her mouth. She did not cry. My father was in the doorway behind her in his flannel work shirt and his Marine Corps League cap with the tarnished eagle, globe, and anchor. He did not move. He did not speak. He was waiting for me to come up the steps. I came up the steps. My mother stepped aside. My father moved out of the doorway, 3 steps backward into the house, to let me in. I walked into the kitchen. The commissioning photograph was on the kitchen table, face up, where it had been for 3 weeks. My white cover went onto the chair next to the door. I sat at the table. My father sat across from me. My mother went to the counter and started making coffee, slowly, on purpose, to give the room time. Knox came in the back door and sat at the head of the table on the side closest to the den. None of us spoke for a full minute. My father said, "MCIA." I said, "Yes." He said, "2 stars." I said, "Yes." He looked at my chest at the ribbon rack and his eyes went down the rows. He pointed at the second ribbon on the second row. He said, "What's that one?" I said, "Bronze Star with V device." February 2005. Iraq. Outside Ramadi. He looked at the ribbon for another 5 seconds. He said, "You never told me." I said, "You never asked, Dad." He said, "No, I never did." He looked down at his coffee. He looked back up. He said, "Tell me." I told him. I did not give him the classified version. I gave him the 7-minute story I had given to General Forsyth in 2006 when he wrote my fitness report. My father listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. When I finished, he said, "That was a Marine action." I said, "It was." He said, "All right." He did not say anything else for a while. We sat at the table for 3 more hours. He asked about 2 more ribbons. I told him about both. He did not apologize. He did not say the words. He did not say, "I am sorry." What he did was ask. For 3 hours in that kitchen, my father asked me questions about my career for the first time in 26 years. My mother poured coffee 3 times. Knox kept his hands flat on the table and did not speak. At sundown, my father stood up slowly, his back hurting him the way it had hurt him since 2012, and he put his hand on my shoulder. He did not salute. He did not need to. He had saluted plenty. I drove back to Quantico the next morning before dawn in service Bravos with the dress blues hanging in the garment bag in the back seat the way they had been in May. I left the folded letter from my breast pocket on the kitchen table under my coffee cup. I did not read it to him. I did not need to. He would find it. He would read it. He would not mention it. That was fine. On Tuesday, August 20th, Lance Corporal Doolin, in Fresh Service Charlie's, reported to my office with the 1-page memorandum I had assigned him in May. He was 1 day late on the deadline. He handed me the memo. I read it in front of him. The memo said, "Ma'am, I have learned that staff work is not desk work. I have learned that the difference between a Marine who tears up a pass and a Marine who reads it is 6 seconds. I have learned that intelligence is the job of being right about something before anyone else is willing to be. I would like to request reclassification to MOS 0231. I have spoken to my gunnery sergeant. He has signed the package. It is attached. Respectfully, Lance Corporal J. Doolin, United States Marine Corps." I said, "Lance Corporal." He said, "Aye, ma'am." I said, "Approved. Get out of my office. Do not come back unless you have made corporal." He almost smiled. He said, "Aye, ma'am." He left. I signed the package the same afternoon. He made corporal 12 weeks later. He came back to tell me. I made him stand in the doorway. I would not let him over the threshold. He understood. He saluted from the doorway. In late August, Imogen Trask dropped by my office in dress blues with 2 coffees and a paper bag of pastries from a bakery in Fredericksburg. She sat in the chair, facing the photograph of 14-year-old me with the science fair trophy. She listened while I told her about Wilmington, about the Bronze Star question, about the letter I had left on the kitchen table. She said, "You told him your story." I said, "He asked about 3 ribbons. I told him about 3 ribbons. She said, "Did you tell him about the rest?" I said, "No." She said, "Why not?" I said, "Because the rest are still mine." I'm not auditioning anymore, Im. The first 3 were the apology. The rest are just the story. He will get them at his pace. She said, Marlena, stop. You sound like you have finally figured it out. I said, I think I have. I had not figured it out. I had stopped pretending I had to. In early September, my mother called and told me in one sentence that my father had hung the commissioning photograph on the wall over the mantel, in the place of honor, above Knox's high school football trophy. She said, he moved the picture this morning. Before I could speak, she changed the subject and started telling me about a neighbor's dog and the trash cans. I let her change the subject. She did not want a reaction. She wanted me to know she had finally been allowed to stop. She had been moving that picture for 26 years. She wanted me to know the moving was done. In mid-September, I stood at the rail above the Quantico parade deck on a humid afternoon and watched a graduating basic school company run a 6-mile combat ruck, female lieutenants in the lead pack. I did not say anything. I just watched. The phone in my dress blue trouser pocket vibrated. It was a text from Knox. The text said, Dad asked when he could come up. My father came to Quantico on Friday, October 16th, 2026. He came with my mother in a navy blazer and my brother Knox at the wheel of his pickup. They stopped at the visitor center main gate at 0900 hours. Corporal Jackson Doolin, 2 chevrons on his collar now, 21 years old, 2 months from his Marine Corps Intelligence Specialist School report date, was behind the counter in Fresh Service Charlie's. He had read the day's expected visitor log. He knew the name. He knew whose father it was. He stood up. He took the identification with both hands. He said, Welcome to Marine Corps Base Quantico, Sergeant Major. Right this way, sir. My father said, Corporal, how'd you know my rank? Doolin said, Your daughter, sir. My father waited a long beat. He said, Carry on, Corporal. Doolin said, Aye, sir. They came up the long drive to the MCIA headquarters building. I met them in the lobby in dress blue alphas, 2 silver stars on each shoulder board, white cover on the front desk next to me. My aide stood beside me. Behind us on the lobby wall, the photographs of every director of MCIA since the directorate was created in 1993. 12 men in the first 11 slots. My photograph was the 12th, the last on the wall, taken 3 weeks earlier in the same dress blues I was wearing now. My father walked in. He saw the wall. He stopped walking. He looked at the wall for 30 seconds without speaking. Then he said, To the wall and not to me. 2 stars, that's the job. I said, That's the job. He turned to me. He said, Show me the office. I walked them down the hallway. I opened the door of the director's office. The 2-star flag stood behind the desk. The framed photograph of 14-year-old me with the science fair trophy was on the corner of the desk, facing the visitor chair. My father walked in. He saw the photograph. He stopped. He said, Your mother kept that photograph. I said, She did. He said, I moved it 3 times. I said, I know. He paused longer than he had ever paused for any sentence in this story. He said, I shouldn't have. He did not say, I am sorry. He said I shouldn't have. 5 years ago, I would not have known the difference. 5 years from now, I would not need it. On the day he said it, I had just enough room left in me to receive it and not have to do anything with it. He walked slowly to my desk. He has not been able to bend the way he used to since 2012. He put one hand flat on the desk. He looked at my ribbon rack. He pointed at the bronze star with V, the one I had named for him in his kitchen in August. Then he pointed at the Distinguished Service Medal, the one from my Brigadier General pinning, the one I had not named yet. He said, What's that one? I said, Distinguished Service Medal, awarded August 2023, Brigadier General pinning. He said, 3 years ago. I said, Yes. He said, Why didn't you tell me 3 years ago? I said, Because I was waiting for you to ask. He said, How long would you have waited? I said, As long as it took. He said, Yeah, that's a Halloran. That was the closest he ever came to calling me his. He called me a Halloran in my own office, with his own hand on my desk, and what I felt was not vindication. What I felt was the relief of putting down a load I had been carrying so long I had forgotten its weight. I walked my family to the rail above the parade deck. A basic school company was running a 6-mile ruck in late morning humidity. Female lieutenants in the lead pack. My father watched. My mother watched. Knox stood next to me with his hands in his back pockets. My father said, very quietly, "Half the Corps walks." I said very quietly, "Doesn't matter." He looked at me. He almost smiled. He said, "No, doesn't matter." We had been arguing that sentence for 26 years. He had said it to me on a payphone from Wilmington in 2000. I had carried it for a quarter century. On a parade deck at Quantico in October, with my mother and my brother and my father next to me, we finished the argument by both of us saying the same thing. He gave me his sentence back, and he meant it, and I gave him mine back, and I meant it too. The argument was not won. It was over. That afternoon, after they had gone, after Knox had driven them back to Wilmington, after I had closed the office door and turned the photograph of 14-year-old me toward the empty visitor chair, I sat at the desk alone in dress blues. The 2-star flag stood behind me. Outside, the rain that had been promising all afternoon had finally started, the same kind of rain as the morning in May. I took off my white cover. I set it on the wood. I looked out the window at the empty parade deck. I did not need his approval to be a Marine. I had built that without him, on purpose, because I did not want him in any of it. What I had not understood, until October, was that I did not need his approval to stop performing for him either. The performance had been mine, not his. The Lance Corporal had torn up a piece of paper. I had taped it back together. I had taken the office. I had taught the kid. I had driven down to Wilmington. I had let my father ask the questions he had spent 48 years refusing to ask. And then I had taken the cover off my head, and I had put it on my own desk, in my own office, in my own building, on my own base. Peace does not come from winning. It comes from no longer having to. If you've ever had a parent in your life who measured you by the wrong yardstick for 30 years and you finally stopped trying to fit it, I would love to hear how you got there. Did your dad ever ask you a question he should have asked you 20 years earlier? Did you give him the answer, or did you keep it for yourself? Was the peace you found at the end of it the kind that feels like winning, or the kind that feels like putting something down? If this one hit you, drop a comment and tell me where it landed. And if you're new here, hit subscribe so we can keep telling stories like this together.